Let me post to Edsby. Going live. Oh, I can't because I'm still trying to upload stuff to Edsby.
I'll post on behind.
Okay. I wonder what the kids prefer, Zoom or YouTube Live.
Right? I was wondering the same thing. That's why I gave them the option.
Yeah. All right, I posted to Remind, posting to Edsby. And you want them to talk through Remind, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I might just have my text messages pulled up then. What we got? Okay, we got 14 people. Good stuff. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My super grainy video. And Green, whenever you want to chime in, you can.
Okay.
Yeah, Edsby's freaking out. Hi, Chris. They're all going to text me now. I'm just going to blow up my phone. All right, so for the sake of time, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start right at 12 going over stuff since this is going to be a recorded video and other people can watch it. But we'll make sure that in the video, kids know that, you know, they have a whole day. And Miss Green, I was actually thinking about making it the whole weekend that they get.
For what?
To watch this video.
Yeah, I was thinking till Sunday at midnight.
Okay, that works for me. Yeah. So then they can have all the time they need. I would, if YouTube could screen share, man.
I know.
I think they can. You just have to download a streaming program, and we can't do that on these computers. All right, gonna give it one more minute, some time for people to log in. Since we're setting at 60. Thanks, Jared. All right, so for everyone that's here so far, what you need in front of you is your FRQ, or not FRQ, the review packet with the notes. We're going to run through that really, really quick, and then the multiple choice in front of you. Also keep in mind what will be are the updates we know about AP Human Geography, which we know a lot more coming out right now, actually at noon. So we'll get that, and we'll send the link to that on Edsby. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the date of the exam, what the plan is, and then, you know, going from here. Cool?
Yep.
Cool. All right. And of course, Ms. Green is here with me on FaceTime because, you know, we are practicing social distancing. We're being good as best as we can. Wow.
Should I go ahead and start out with a few comments?
Yeah. Yeah. I hope everyone can hear you. They said they could last week. I turned you all the way up. So
yeah, I can hear myself through the YouTube.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Go ahead then.
Okay, so don't forget that if you have any questions throughout this process, we turned off chat this time to speed things up, but you can always submit your questions through Remind. Mr. Bears reminds, and we'll be checking them throughout the live feed and answering any questions that you have. Also, don't forget that your work is due at 9 a.m. on Friday. So every week, all of your work for the week will be due at 9 a.m. on Friday. The reason we do this is so that you have your work done. So when you watch the YouTube live video, you can ask any questions that you may have about your work. If you haven't turned in your work yet because you just made a mistake with time, that's okay. We understand that this week has been quite an adjustment, but just try to get your work in as soon as possible today so that we can go ahead and get it graded.
And on that topic, and I put this out in our mind yesterday, just because it's due at 9 a.m. on Friday doesn't mean that you can't turn it in earlier. Like if you get it done by Thursday, turn it in on Thursday so you don't have to deal with EDSB being slow and did it upload, did it not upload. It's just easier that way. It's easier for you guys if you can get it done. So something to think about. Okay, otherwise we got 90 people here. It's past 12 o'clock. We're gonna get started. You cool with that, Ms. Green?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, first off, Unit 1, super easy, guys. This should have been really, really easy. If anything, you should have really picked up on some of this fundamental information and used it as a way to solidify the knowledge that we've recently talked about. And we'll get into that, especially when we talk about scale of analysis. But starting off with the notes, you looked at the 1-1, the introduction to maps, and this should have been very straightforward, being able to recognize these. We know that we have two types of maps, right? We have reference maps that tell us where we're looking at location-wise on the world, and then we have thematic maps. And it doesn't look like any of these are reference maps. So they're all thematic maps showing you data. The top left one is going to be the choropleth map with the reds and the oranges and the yellows. And we know that choropleth maps are used to display data, but the issue is that they paint these broad strokes of data over a given space. So we can't figure out the specifics of where that data is coming from, but it is very easy to read. Then you have your dot map to the right of it, where we're going to display, information using dots, which is great, very specific. But once we start getting a lot of dots, it gets hard to read. Then we have the graduated symbol, which is the U.S. Oil consumption. Same thing as dot maps. They are really specific, but once they start getting together, it makes it very difficult to read. And then finally, that blue one is a topo map with isolines. How you recognize this is that some people got confused and thinks it was a choropleth map, and I was thinking about this last night with Miss Green, or a couple days ago. I forgot when we talked about it. But what should indicate here, one, is that yes, there are different colors, but they are centering around specific points. So that shows elevation. And two, the colors go over the formal regions, right? Whereas in choropleth maps, the color exists inside that formal region because it's that shared characteristic of that region. Not to bring in vocab from other topics, but that's how we can look at that map and go, okay, we know that this data spreads over those formal regions, those political boundaries. So we know that can't be a choropleth map. All right, and then we moved on to the different map projections. Green, did you want to take this one?
Sure. We do have a cartogram in there before we get to the map projection. Don't forget, cartogram just shows it shows information through size. So the bigger the object, the more of whatever that they're measuring. Then next, our first projection is going to be a Robinson projection. Remember that this is our most common type of projection. This is usually what we see in textbooks or in classrooms, just because it attempts to strike a balance with it having distortion in all four categories. Our second projection is a Mercator projection. Don't forget, projection is going to be an azimuthal/polar projection. Now, we saw a lot of common mistakes when it came to this projection here. A lot of people were listing other types of projections. Don't forget, with azimuthal, you can not only have a bird's eye view, so you're looking at the poles, the top and the bottom of the Earth, You can also have a side view of the Earth, and it can still be considered a polar projection. Now, here's a way to tell that it's a polar projection. In order to accurately display the poles at the top and the bottom of the Earth, it has to stretch out the center of the Earth quite a bit. And if you look at this projection, you can see how stretched out Latin America is, how stretched out Africa is, and then you can see that the poles are accurately displayed, like they look normal on this map or this projection. So that lets you know that it's a polar projection. Then we get down to a fuller projection. This is the one that looks like puzzle pieces. Then next we have the good projection. You can always tell it's a good projection because it looks like the map has been, or the Earth has been cut into 4 sections. And then our last one is also azimuthal/polar projection. Now this is our most common way of looking at a polar projection, where we look at the top of the Earth or the bottom of the Earth.
Fantastic. Okay. And then for the next part, we moved into geographic data, mostly looking at tools. Guys, know the basic differences between the tools. GPS is using reference points. It would place the data on reference maps. It's satellites in space figuring out where you are. Whereas something like remote sensing is going to collect data from the Earth's surface. It's going to take pictures of that stuff. And then we're going to use those pictures in GIS to then layer it over a map so we can see spatial patterns. And I use that word for a very specific reason, which we'll talk more about later. Then we moved on to the question, what role does the census play in the type of information? Census allows us to gather demographic data and be beneficial for our government to keep track of this. It's all demographic stuff, guys. It's all figuring out where populations are spread, employment, dependency ratios to build population pyramids, to talk about total fertility rates. I mean, you can, endless stuff. Looking at education, they can use it as a way of measuring development in the country. When they ask you what jobs do you have, ages, all that stuff.
I do want to say something about that, Mr. Bayer.
Go for it.
So right now the census is out, and it's been mailed to your parents. They've probably gotten a few things in the mail about it. So right now, all adults or all households are getting a piece of paper that has a code on it, and then you just go onto the census website and plug in your code, and then you fill out the survey, and then you participate in the census. So if you're interested in this, you should ask your parents if they've done it, or how's it gone, what questions did they ask.
And we also know that it also goes into, redistricting and gerrymandering, which is still part of the curriculum. We'll talk more about that when we get to it in Unit 4, but that is probably the biggest role that the census plays, at least in the United States. Moving on to 3, explaining how GPS and GIS work together. I kind of just talked about it. The GPS finds you, GIS helps us show data and spatial patterns on maps versus our location. Then we talked about spatial concepts. Absolute location, it's exactly where you are in that place, and it's site kind of describing what's specifically there, where relative location is what is surrounding relative location or situation is what is surrounding that place. Take a quick break real quick because I am getting questions from students. Okay, so student asks, how is the census going to be affected by COVID-19? Good question. Because a lot of it's not in paper anymore, so they can do it online, and I don't know how strict enforcement has ever been in a census. I haven't really looked into it. Ms. Green, do you know?
It's not strict. If you get the paper in the mail, it says that you have to absolutely fill it out, but nobody's really monitoring if you fill it out or not. I do think with the coronavirus going on, we're going to see a lot of people not participate in it just because they're too stressed out and it's the last thing on their mind to fill out a survey. So, yeah, in a way, it could negatively affect us.
Or we're so bored and have nothing else to do that why not fill out the census? I know my wife did when she was bored. I don't know. All right, on to distance decay. Oh, geez, I got another question. Yeah, they did go door to door, but I guess, yeah, they definitely can't go to door right now. All right, moving on to distance decay. Basically, the idea, the further away from something you are, the less likely you are to interact with that. But thanks to new communication tools, globalization, stuff like that, and space-time compression, the idea that the world is much smaller and we're able to interact more. We expanded on this topic a whole lot more when we started talking about like international supply chains, globalization, the new international division of labor, which is unfortunate that won't be on the exam, but we understand it a lot more now. All right, and then human-environment interaction, and this is mainly focusing on, environmental possibilism versus determinism. The first question asks, explain how the environment can impact and influence people, how they live. I mean, that is determinism, and it's, sorry, I gotta lower this. I also have another question. Okay. So explain how the environment can impact and influence how people and societies live. People develop tools for what they live in. Okay, so when we talk about, well, first let's review the difference between determinism and possibilism, because this is always something a lot of people get confused. Determinism does determine what the people will accomplish in their environment, but it's the idea that the environment is going to set barriers, and because the environment sets barriers, the people overcome those barriers and propel their society. Whereas people that don't have barriers have nothing to advance themselves with because the environment isn't pushing them to, if that makes sense. Whereas possibilism says any society can progress, anybody can do whatever they want, and anybody can overcome the environment, and overcoming the environment isn't the determining factor if your society is progressing or not. It's just something all humans have the ability to do. So when we talk about how we influence the environment, we look at agriculture as a great example. When we adapt and change an environment to fit agriculture, when we need to grow food for ourselves. So that's a really good example to use. And explain how people modify the environment and the impact that has on resources and the environment as a whole. Green, do you want to take over on this one? That's okay. Basically, we used environmental ones, especially involving agriculture, cutting down trees or building aqueducts and using irrigation, stuff like that, how we impact the environment, the cultural landscape even. And then, is this photo below a product of environmental determinism or possibilism? I would say possibilism. It's overcoming the problem in the environment. You're getting over the river. Pretty straightforward. Okay, let's talk about scale, because students had a lot of questions when it came to scale. And I think what we're confused on is scale of analysis. So look, everything we have done all year is analyze spatial patterns. Spatial patterns just mean what pattern do you see in a space, right? And that space can be a country, it can be a region, it can be the entire globe. And when I talk about those different levels of space, I'm changing my scale of analysis. Am I using a really big scale and a small map? Or am I using a really big map and a small scale? And the whole question about this is, when I change the scale that I'm looking at, does it change the data I get, right? That's it. So when we look at the United States in agriculture, and I use this example in the video, but if I look at agriculture on the scale of the US, Florida would be all oranges. But if I zoom in on Florida, if I change the scale of analysis and I zoom in on Florida and I make the scale bigger and I get a lot more, characteristics and a lot more specifics, I would say that Florida is not all oranges, that we have different agricultural products, that we have industry, we have urban areas, but it all depends on the scale of analysis, right? That's what it all comes back to. So when they use this example in the packet, that's really what you want to think about, is how does the data change based off of what I'm looking at? That's it. And we can apply that to population, to migration, to the culture unit, to the political geography unit, and any of those things. Any data that we get, we can look at it at different scales. And I have a really strong suspicion that they're going to add a question like this into some type of writing. Like it'll be like a part C and it says, how would this data change if we increase the scale? or decrease the scale of analysis. And you're going to have to put together information on what could possibly change, because they really like talking about scale of analysis.
I want to jump in on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I agree. That's what I told some of my students yesterday, is that I have a strong feeling that they're going to include scale of analysis as well on some sort of writing piece for your FRQ. And so when they ask you, like, how is the scale going to change, all you have to think about is, if you zoom in more on the map, how does the information change? Or if you zoom out on the map, how does the information change? I'm going to go ahead and walk through some examples of like the local scale, the regional scale, and so on for 1.6.
Go for it.
If we wanted to apply like coronavirus right now to all these different scales available, like if we wanted to look at coronavirus at the local scale, then I'm going to pull up information about what's happening in Tampa, because that's my local community. But then if I wanted to look at coronavirus at the regional scale, then I'm going to zoom out a little bit more on that map. And now let's say I'm looking at all the cases of coronavirus in the South. And then I zoom out a little bit more on the map. And now I want to look at coronavirus. And then on the national scale, now I'm looking at all the cases in the United States. Mm-hmm. And then I keep zooming out on the map even more. And I'm looking at it at the global scale. And now I'm looking at all the cases throughout the world.
And now I want to chime in, because this is so relevant. If I was, how would the data, or how would my interpretation of the data change based on the scale? If I was looking at a global map of coronavirus infections, New York would just be a solid red dot, right? Or say we're using a choropleth map. Look at us, we're using a ton of information now. So if we're using choropleth maps, thematic maps, and we're changing our scale, and we're looking at a global scale, all of New York would be whatever the most extreme color would be. But we also know that's disingenuous, because it's New York City that's being hit the hardest because it's so densely populated. So maybe I want to change my scale of analysis, or the map I'm using, to get better data about what's going on. Or if, say, you know, I'm the president of the United States and I'm looking at the US in whole, I can see, okay, there are states that aren't being affected by the coronavirus, and there's states that are, and I'm going to focus on that. But if I'm the governor of New York, I need to change that scale of analysis to look at just New York, to see what districts are being affected by it, where in New York are people being affected by it, so I could implement effective policy to deal with those areas. It would be silly for the governor of New York to look at the United States. That wouldn't be the correct scale of analysis. They would want to look at the individual state. So I hope that clears things up. I mean, that connects a couple topics. That good with you, Ms. Green?
Yep. Solid.
Cool. What an explanation on the fly using coronavirus. All right. And then finally, the last part, regional analysis. Your formal regions, they have identifiable borders because they have a shared characteristic. That can be a political characteristic, a cultural characteristic, a physical characteristic. And if a place shares thing with the whole area, it's a formal region. Then you have your functional regions, which are based around a node. We talked a lot about these before we went out to spring break, especially with businesses. So that should be a really easy thing. Remember, you have the node in the center and it reaches out to a certain area. And then after that, you cannot go there anymore, or you go to a different functional region. And then finally, the favorite one, the perceptual vernacular region. Those are the ones where it's like, you know you're there, but you don't know where you are, or where it starts and stops. You just know when you're there, you're there. And it's generally based off of culture, identifiable pieces of culture. Anything you want to add with that, Ms. Green?
No.
Cool. All right, let's move on to multiple choice. Getting this done. All right. Pull this up here. Okay, first question. Looking at zoom in, I can't see, whatever. Geographers are most interested in analyzing which of the following. Guys, I've hammered this, spatial patterns. If there's one thing in this video that we did was analyze spatial patterns, talking about the coronavirus, talking about the spatial patterns of its distribution, like it's affecting heavily populated urban areas that are densely packed together, and it's barely affecting the Midwest because everybody's so spatially apart from each other. So we can look at that spatial pattern at different scales of analysis to figure out what the most effective ways of stopping it are based on where it's happening. I don't know, crazy example to use. Which map would have the smallest scale looking at 2? That would be the world. Remember, big map, small scale. Small map, big, large scale? Yeah, that. All right, which then takes us into 3, which a lot of people got this one confused. But which of the following map scales would be the most useful to study the details of geographic features in a landscape of a farming community? And the answer is E. You didn't have to know the different measurements on this. You didn't have to know if it was feet, miles, whatever. At the end of the day, when you're looking at a scale, we'll say it's inches to miles, right? If in 1 inch, you're going to pack in 3 million miles versus 1 inch to 10,000 miles, what are you going to be able to see better characteristics of? What is going to be more detailed? Obviously, the scale that's not trying to pack in as much stuff in that 1 inch of space. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, on to 4. New York City's blank is on the Hudson River, approximately 100 miles northeast of Philadelphia and 100 miles southwest of Boston. That would be its situation because it's its relative location to other things. 5, which is not an example of a functional region, and that would be an area dominated by a particular crop. Remember, that's a formal region. Formal regions can be identified by any shared characteristic, and you know exactly where they start and stop. And knowing that a particular crop is grown in that area completely counts. Kentucky, Canada, the Ohio River Valley, a German-speaking region, and Northern Ireland are all formal regions. And I just kind of hit that last one. Formal regions can be just about anything. It can be the lines that we draw on a map to show the political boundaries. It can be tied to languages. It can be tied to crops. At the end of the day, if they share a characteristic and it's easily identifiable, it's a formal region. Anything you want to add to that, Ms. Green, talking about the first? And 7, patterns of church attendance and the distribution area of a first-run film are functional regions. Remember, people go to one church or the other. You can't go to 2 churches in the same day at the same time, right? So people are in a functional region of that place. So yeah, anything you want to add, Ms. Green?
Nope, that's great.
Cool.
I can take over.
Sure, go for it.
So number 8, it said, according to the theory of environmental determinism, your answer here is A. Just remember that with determinism, it's saying like the environment is going to determine what you're capable of as a society. Number 9 said, which of the following best describes the idea of cultural landscape? Remember, cultural landscape is just land modified by humans to reflect their culture. So whatever that culture is being displayed in that community is cultural landscape. So therefore, your answer is D.
We're not to interrupt you. We're going to talk a whole lot more about the cultural landscape in Unit 3. So not this upcoming week, but the following week. So if you're confused on that, that's okay. We're going to go over it more.
Mm-hmm. And then number 10, it said, in order to determine a country's farming efficiency, geographers would look at which type of density. So you had to go through your 3 types of density: arithmetic, physiological, agricultural density. Remember with arithmetic, this is the number of people over land area. So this is going to show areas that are very crowded. Physiological is the number of people over arable land. Remember that arable means farmable. So this is going to show us that with places that have high numbers, this may mean that the country has a hard time feeding all of its people. And then your last density is agricultural, which is the number of farmers over arable land. This really tells us where we have MDCs versus LDCs. Because with MDCs, when it comes to farming, don't forget that we don't have to have a lot of farmers because we have the technology to replace those farmers. Versus LDCs, they don't have that technology, they don't have that machinery, so therefore they're relying on humans to harvest the crops. So they're going to have a lot of farmers for their arable land, so they're going to have a high agricultural density. So if we're trying to look at a country's farming efficiency, meaning do they have a lot of farmers or very few farmers, we're going to look at that agricultural density. Number 11, the frequency of occurrence of something within a given unit of area is going to be density, because frequency is how much something is occurring, and density is the amount. Then you had 12, the extent or spread of something over an area is going to be concentration. Concentration is going to show us how close or spread out something is. Remember, you can have 2 types of concentration. You can have high concentration or low concentration. If something's really far apart, it's going to be low concentration. If something's really close together, it's going to have high concentration. So when I remember teaching this in class this year, and a common mistake that people were making with concentration is you have to remember that the amount of something never changes. Whether it's high or low concentration doesn't matter. So if I have 5 kids in my classroom and they're all standing next to each other, that's high concentration. But if they all spread out and go to different corners or different parts of the room, that's going to be low concentration. But no matter what, I still had 5 kids, whether it was high or low concentration. Then 13, you had to apply density and you had to apply concentration in 14. So for 13, density, you are looking for the boxes with the highest amount of dots. So that's going to be D. And then 14, the highest concentration. So that means close together. So you're looking for the dots that are the closest together, which is going to be also D. And then 15, it talks about a tropical rainforest. They're saying in that place, those people are practicing slash and burn agriculture, and then other tribes are practicing or becoming fishers. This is an example of possibilism. So your environment isn't going to determine what you're capable of as a society. You can overcome some of the problems that you may face in your environment.
All right. So I had students message me about question 8 and question 9. So I'm going to hit those real quick. Looking at question 8, according to the theory of environmental determinism, student asked, why isn't it B? The physical environment sets limits on human actions. Because that is only part of determinism. And that's where I think determinism is kind of a complicated and very convoluted theory. Because it's the idea that, yes, the environment is going to set limits on you. That's exactly what it's going to do. But it's setting those limits because it's the idea that your society will overcome those limits and that your society will progress. Whereas other societies that don't have any roadblocks to development or anything that can the environment stops them, that it's the idea, they're just not going to progress. They are a backward society. And I know that's hard to wrap our brains around. But it comes more into play when you think about the actual arrangement of it, because this was propagated by someone in the North, and in the North they had to deal with winter. So okay, the environment is setting that barrier to development or barrier for those humans, because winter is a long time where you can't grow food, you can't really go outside, and people will starve and die. So those civilizations had to overcome that. And I know that sounds like possibilism, but it's not. And I'll tell you why here in a second. But they had to overcome that. And it gives them the justification that the environment set barriers, they overcame those barriers, and the environment determines that they will eventually progress. Whereas tropical climate, people that live near the equator never had winter, so they never had that roadblock, so they never had a need to progress. Right? The environment determined that their civilization would be simple and easy and backwards because they didn't have any challenges. Possibilism says that anybody can overcome anything, but the environment does not determine what your civilization will accomplish. You will have problems. You'll have to overcome them. But lacking environmental problems doesn't mean that you can't progress as a society either. Because if we follow this idea of determinism, that means all the civilizations that are near the equator or in tropical areas are somehow backwards because they didn't have the idea or have the conflict of winter in the way of them, progressing. If that makes sense. I know, very convoluted, very crazy. Anything you want to add to that, Ms. Green?
No, but also with you tying into possibilism and determinism, I had a student ask me about number 15 as well. So will you go ahead and explain that one?
Sure. So, and this goes exactly to what I was talking about. They had to alter their environment to grow food, which we take as possibilism. The reason why this isn't determinism is because determinism specifically targets the people in these tropical climates, saying that, no, they're not going to advance because they don't have as many problems as the northern civilizations do. But they still have to, determinism basically says that they don't have anything to give them problems because it's a tropical climate and they have food year round, which we know isn't true. We know that people that live in tropical climates still have to alter their environment. They still have to change the landscape so they can grow food. That's what makes it possibilism, that they are still going to encounter their own problems, maybe not as extreme as winter in the north, but they still have to alter their environment. And that's where possibilism comes into play. Guys, at the end of the day, let's just keep it simple. Possibilism is the idea that humans can do whatever they need to do to the environment to overcome it. But those barriers in the environment do not determine what that civilization will accomplish. Is that good? I hope it's not confusing. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to go to 9 real quick because a student asked about that. They said, why couldn't the answer be C, land that has been developed with museums, concert halls, and schools? Okay, C, technically a correct answer. There's just a better one. And it's one of those cases where it's like, yes, there's the right answer, and now there's the more right answer. Because the cultural landscape is anything we build. It's the really cool special stuff that helps us identify a place. And we're like, yeah, we know that's, Paris because of the Eiffel Tower. But it's also the Publix, it's the Walgreens, it's the schools, it's all the boring stuff too. That's why D is just a better answer for that. All right. So that's all the multiple choice, guys. Now I want to briefly talk about what's going to happen on the AP exam and what's to be expected from you guys in these upcoming weeks. So we have learned that it's going to be 2 writing questions. It's going to be a 25-minute question and a 15-minute question. After each question, you're going to have 5 minutes to upload your answer to College Board, and they're gonna send out a practice simulation for all of you to try it so you know exactly what to do. Now, from my understanding is that you're gonna, the 25-minute one, we could definitely say there's gonna be a stimulus. It's 25 minutes long. It's gonna be the harder one. It's gonna be the one that involves a little more writing and a little more thinking. But I think it's gonna be, because there's only 2 writings, it's gonna be across multiple units. Right? So we're going to try and develop some FRQs after we review all the content to hit you guys with these FRQs that are going to be multi-unit based. But next week, we are going to give you guys some practice FRQs, but I don't think it's going to be exactly what you're expecting. Hang tight. It's going to be great. You're going to love it, but it is going to just focus on unit 2. Once we're done with our 5 weeks of review, then we're going to practice FRQs in that last week before the exam. We're going to practice FRQ writing across multiple units. So we know it's going to be 2 written answers, 25 minutes and 15 minutes. Safe to say it's going to be across multiple units. I think the test date was what, May 11th or 12th?
Shoot, it's like the second day of testing.
Yeah, it's the 11th or 12th because I know Gov is the 11th or 12th. So
it's the 12th.
It's the 12th. Okay, so Gov is on the 11th.
At 4 p.m.
So on May 12th at 4 p.m. So that gives us an extra week of review. So we're going to use that extra week, like I said, to prepare you for FRQ writing. So business is the same for the next 4 weeks. We've gotten our first week done of review. For the next 4 weeks, you're going to have a video on YouTube of me lecturing. You're going to get review stuff similar to the review note thing. You're going to get some FRQs as an exercise, and we're going to go from there. And we'll do this as a weekly wrap up. After this, you are going to see something pop up on EDSB to confirm that you were here and to give us a little bit of feedback on what's going on. Besides that, I think that's everything. If you have any questions, right now's the time to ask them through Remind. I'm checking my phone right now.
I'm going to jump in too and say a few things.
Yeah, go for it.
For Green's classes, in order for me to take attendance on this, you are going to submit 1 higher order thinking question on Unit 1. Do not copy anything off the internet. I've seen all Unit 1 questions available from College Board on the internet. I need you to make one based off your notes. You submit that to me, and you'll see the assignment posted on EDSB. You submit that to me by Sunday at midnight. I'll give you credit for watching this YouTube video. Or same thing goes for Zoom. If you joined my Zoom meeting yesterday, same thing. You submit a question by Sunday at midnight, and I'll give you credit for it. I want to talk about the AP exam a little bit more. I know some of you guys are wondering, well, can't you just cheat on something that's online? Can't someone else be there helping you? College Board is going to go through quite a few things to make sure that you guys are not cheating. One is everything is going to be sent through a plagiarism checker. So if you copy anything off the internet, they will be running it through. and checking for plagiarism. All FRQs will be sent to your teacher before they're graded. And so if your teacher suspects that there is cheating, because we know how you write at this point for having you almost a whole year, we have to notify College Board that we think a child is cheating. Also, your FRQs are going to be graded by multiple people this year. Usually they're just graded by one person. It looks like they're going to go through multiple checks. Now, College Board is taking extreme measures. If they find you cheating, they will submit that you cheated to every university that you apply to. So if you plan on going to college after high school, College Board will let them know that you cheated on your College Board AP exam. So it is not worth cheating. Do not look things up on the internet. Do not have anyone help you. Just do your best and submit, because the repercussions are so hard this year, and we don't want any child facing those repercussions.
Yeah, that's definitely a point I forgot to mention. Talking to students, they definitely feel like, well, what's going to stop us from taking it next to each other? Like I said, they're being vague about how they're checking everything. Like they even said there are other practices that they are going to put into place that they're not going to tell us to catch cheaters. And either that's a bluff and we're going to fall for it, or there's tons of stuff they're doing and people are going to get caught. Either way, don't do it. Just don't cheat. Don't spend time looking up stuff, because it's going to eat into that precious time that you have to write. I mean, you only have 25 minutes to write and 15 minutes to write. That's not a lot of time to look up information, especially when we're talking about crossing over multiple units. You really just got to go and do your best. So please take that into consideration. Please take this seriously. I think they're definitely going to be a little bit more lenient this year too, when it comes to grading with everything involved. I don't want to put that out there and say, oh, College Board's making this easy. But logistically looking at this, I think a lot of kids are going to have a lot of opportunities to get some serious points. One student asked, what happens if we don't cheat and get accused of cheating? That probably won't happen. You'll be okay. All right, so if that is it, we are hitting the 43-minute mark. That's about 40-minute video. That's plenty of enough time of me talking and Ms. Green talking. So I think that's it. Once again, if you have any questions throughout the week, please message us. We can always set up Zoom conferences. Ms. Green and I talk about how bored we are because we don't get to talk to anybody throughout the day. So if you want to talk to us about classwork, please reach out. And I think that's it. Anything left from you, Ms. Green?
Nope, that's it.
All right, that's it, everybody. Have a good day. See you next time.